Alrighty, folks. So we just got some people coming in. I'm gonna just turn it to gallery view here. So if we can, I see a couple familiar names here. And I think just as people are coming in, our goal here is just to kind of see what people want to talk about, whether or not there's specific issues you want to focus on, anything like that. So it's really, really wide open just to kind of be a place for us to share with each other, maybe kind of download what you've learned today, that sort of a thing. And we'll go for probably about a half hour, 45 minutes. So yeah. So, and yeah, if we can get cameras on, if that's possible. I know I'm just sitting here doing sewing, but we can get things right. Yeah. So what do you guys want to talk about? Keynote speaker, or maybe something in the sessions that you learned. Melissa, because you've got your camera on, I'm going to pick on you first here. So what are some of your insights that you really appreciated from things so far today?
I've just been really enjoying learning about other perspectives outside of Alberta and just kind of like mulling over, okay, how can I try to blend more Indigenous ways of knowing that's outside of just the Alberta perspective into my classroom. So that's what I've been mulling over.
And what are some of the perspectives that you've liked?
I really liked the like treaty one and the more focusing on like what does it mean to be Métis and kind of those perspectives on like accountability and stuff with in regards to status as well, and kind of embodying what are Indigenous values and everything. So kind of wanting to discuss more about that when I talk about the various perspectives in my classroom.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I know like we're just always evolving. Like 5-6 years ago, I used to just basically say, well, Métis mixed blood, right? It's the mix of cultures. And then, I met a Métis person that was like, I'm so much more than that. And I'm so tired of being, labeled as just, my blood quantum is what's important. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like this is a terrible way that I'm teaching it. The Métis people are a people, not
Yeah.
just a mishmash of other things. And so I love that fact, like you said, that we can talk to other people and get those new perspectives so that we can bring them into our classroom. So that's awesome. Fantastic.
Kind of sounds, it makes it sound like there's some sort of car crash or something, of cultures instead of something unto themselves.
Right? Like something to be celebrated. It was like, just happened, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. How about you, Jason? Oh, sorry, Melissa, I didn't ask you to introduce yourself. I should probably do that myself as well, so we just kind of know who everybody is. So I'm Jen Williams. I'm in Airdrie, Alberta, so that's just north of Calgary. And I'm also the president of the Social Studies Council here in Alberta, which I always am uncomfortable saying that because I just feel like it sounds like I know something, but it's just that I was dumb enough to volunteer is more what it's all about. But yeah, so then Melissa, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll go to Jason?
Yeah, I'm McLean. I am a high school social teacher in Drayton Valley, Alberta, so Treaty 6 territory. I'm one of the regional presidents, and again, it was because volunteerism, and not that I know anything either.
And how about you, Jason?
My name is Jason Vandermeelen. I'm in Waterloo. I live and work on the Haldeman Tract, and so I work at Waterloo Collegiate Institute, and I'm the head of history there at WCI. So,
can you tell me more about the Haldeman Tract? I don't know much about it.
Okay, so absolutely. So our daily land acknowledgement is focused on the land that has traditionally used by, Anishinaabe as well, but also the Haudenosaunee. It's kind of cool. It's like this, we talk about the United Empire Loyalists coming up at the end of the war, and usually we focus on these British, but we always forget about maybe the Black populations that were sent to Nova Scotia by the British, and so the Iroquois Confederacy, which existed for the most part south of the Great Lakes, and after banding together with the British and the American War of Independence, they many of them, I shouldn't say all of them, but many of them took the opportunity to get out of there and go north of the Great Lakes. So It's this great big strip of land that follows the Grand River, which flows into Lake Erie. And it goes several hundred kilometers north. So anyway, all of that 10 miles on either side of this river, the Grand River, were promised to the Six Nations of the Grand. So
And why is it named Holderman?
It's actually named after the British official who negotiated the deal. So yeah, that's a good
I love
question.
it. So it's land for the Indigenous people, named after the colonizer who's going to give you your land that you already own.
100%.
Or live on. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's right. It's exactly right.
Oh.
So yeah. And like most territories that were sort of set aside as reserves for exclusive use for Indigenous peoples over the years, there's that usual sort of chipping away and expropriation until today. The Six Nations of the Grand Reserve is about 5%, I think, of what was originally offered to them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
5%.
where I live, my house is built on, that land. So
how do you reconcile that with yourself? Like, I get that question a lot. So I'm teaching a course on from an organization called Facing History in Ourselves about teaching residential schools. And that's a question I quite often get from people, especially living in areas like Vancouver and Toronto, is how can I, as a settler, reconcile the fact that my house is on land that was unceded or unfairly taken?
I don't know if you can reconcile that, to be honest. I mean, how do you reconcile that except to sort of say, I think this is yours, I should give it back. But it's it's a tough one, but it's sort of this question of how do you sort of, like Canada's always kind of consoled itself in a way by talking about the American way of unfurling from east to west and becoming, doing it at the, using guns and the series of Indian wars and genocide. And while we've had conflict and wars and bloodshed in Canada, for the most part, it was different, but it was a white collar crime is what it was, instead of sort of a smash and grab. So it was sort of an agreement, and don't worry, we'll take care of everything, but we didn't really. It's kind of like when your accountant sort of frittles away your fortunes until all of a sudden you find out you're bankrupt, but your accountant is living, somewhere high up the hog, and
yeah. And like I tell my students, like for us, it's very passive aggressive, right? And that like here in Alberta, it was the elimination of the buffalo and the oppression of the people, and yet we can, like you said, we can kind of console ourselves going, well, yeah, but we didn't shoot them, so
right.
And treaties were signed, but it's like, well, yeah, but by the time they got to Alberta, the Indigenous people were saying, we gotta sign treaties, like we're going to be coerced into it because. But it just feels so much more comfortable to me to be like, yeah, I live on treaty land. It was ceded, whether or not it was fairly, but yeah.
What treaty would Calgary be, like Treaty
7?
7? Yeah. Okay.
We've got 6, 7, and 8 here in Alberta.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Big areas. Yeah. In fact, where I used to live by Lethbridge is actually the largest reserve in Canada. There's a enormous reserve for the Kainai. It used to be called Blood Reserve, but same thing, that if you weren't using the land the way that the government thought it should be used, you could lose it. So they even lost some of the land because it wasn't being used the way they thought it should be used. But it's pretty big and beautiful, right against the mountains. It's gorgeous. Oh yeah. Carson, how about you?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
So Carson, where are you from? You're muted. Did we lose Carson? And I have MIA program 2. I know you were having trouble connecting to your audio, it looked like earlier.
Good afternoon. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Just thought
So I
I'd see
guess
if you wanted to,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I wanted to see if you wanted to join in on our conversation.
Yes, thank you. I'm in from Manitoba. I'm in Winnipeg here. Um, and, teaching social studies for my first year is
Oh,
where I'm
great.
at. Although this is my 26th year of being in the profession.
So elementary or secondary?
Grade 8.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Right in
stuck in the
between.
middle there. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your highlight from things so far?
Well, being first time teaching social studies, it was just nice looking at different programs that are out there that we could use, and just how to add to my classroom. Where we are doing all the inquiry learning and all that focus, but it's nice seeing what else is out there and what else we can use to enrich the experience for our students.
Yeah. So is there a big focus at your schools for inquiry?
There is.
And how do you
There is.
approach that? Like, what are some tools that you really like that you use?
At this point, it's looking off of what other people have been
Yeah.
doing, and it's the learning process and being back into the system and taking old school ideas and trying to put a flip on it so that it's more accessible for the students, and looking at different ways of questioning and just the different pedagogy that's involved with this. So I haven't taken any of the university courses that are out there. It's just changing my mind and my thinking and how to do things and how to access making the classroom more accessible for the students, and approaching a different, a deeper level of questioning, approach, and applying that to the classroom.
Yeah, I had a chance this morning to watch the pre-recorded video from the War Museum. And I love the fact that for Remembrance Day, they have all of these different perspectives on, Remembrance Day from women and Japanese Canadians and Indigenous people, because it's like you said, we want to make our classes more accessible. And that's how I can make my class more accessible. That I always joke that when I first moved to Airdrie about 15 years ago, I called my classes Wonder Bread because they were the whitest place I'd ever been. There actually was not a single visible minority in any of my classes, but it's changed significantly. Like, we've become much, much more multicultural. And so I want to make my lessons more accessible to all of the kids in the class, not just I call them the dead white guys that we look at all the time. So yeah. In Manitoba schools, do they usually do a land acknowledgement every day or at special occasions, or what do they do for land acknowledgements at your schools?
They do that before O Canada.
Every day?
Every day before O Canada, yes.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Jason?
Yep, same. They change it up a little bit every day, but there is a land acknowledgement of some kind every day.
Every day.
How about Alberta?
Well, Melissa, what about your school?
We don't have one at all because we don't do announcements at my school. But I do a land acknowledgement on every Monday in my own classrooms.
Are you
Wow.
both in Calgary?
I'm from Drayton Valley, so I'm a very, very small community, about an hour and a half northwest of Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And is it fairly conservative, Drayton Valley?
Yeah, we're actually the most conservative constituency in all of Canada. In the federal election, we had a 99.9% conservative vote.
Wow.
Wow.
Holy cow.
By your celebration, it looks like you might be the 0.1% or.
The thing is, I actually couldn't vote. I had COVID, and so I was stuck at home. So I'm just nobody. I don't exist.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. What would the government do for people that had COVID during the election because you lost your franchise?
Yeah, because I couldn't pre-vote. Well, I didn't pre-vote because I'm like, oh, like the ballot's like literally down the street from me. I'm like, why would I mail in a ballot. I'm going to be here. And then, yeah, I got COVID 3 days before. So the mail-in voting was over with.
Done.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't even think of that. That's fascinating. I wonder how many people weren't able to vote because they weren't allowed to leave their house.
Yeah. And so now all the kids bug me because they start complaining about politics and they're like, and you can't complain because you didn't vote. And I'm just like, I hate you all so much.
That is
very
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, my school division's fairly behind in a lot of this, that they actually did their first school division wide land acknowledgement this September in one meeting. They did it. And so, but what I'm curious, I can see the pros and cons of doing it like Melissa does once a week or something like that. But here's my torn is, if you do it every day, it really reinforces it. And it's like, oh, Canada, I mean, that's stuck in my head. If you do it once a week, does it make it a little bit more special? I'm not happy with how my school does it, that we do it like twice a year, that sort of a thing. And so I'm curious to kind of see, those of you guys that do it every day, do you see that the kids kind of tune out? What do you guys think?
They started this about 2 years ago, and I didn't support the idea of doing it every day because I thought it would become just sort of this recurring dogma that ceases to have any meaning. But I think I was wrong on that, and I feel like, when I watch the kids kind of stand at the beginning of the day, there's this this kind of reverence that kids kind of have for both. And every once in a while you can allude to it, you can sort of talk about that land acknowledgement, talk about why it's there, and this concept of treaty and this concept of a mutually exclusive sovereign people that are multiple peoples, really, and that you have a country that is actually really complicated in its design and in the way that it's put together. It's neat because we also now have a cohort of students that have been through it for a few years now, and it's also when it first started happening, it was definitely there's a little bit more, maybe the odd eye rolling or something like that. Or I remember one thing that stood out. I saw a student kind of look at her friend and just kind of like her hand was on her desk and just slapped her own hand like this during the land acknowledgement. And I thought, that what an interesting gesture. That was sort of this, sort of self abasement of, oh, now I have to feel bad because it's the land acknowledgement, right? So, but it's come a long way, and it's just part of that education piece, I think, and that it's like any social change. It's like steering a massive ocean liner. You maybe turn the wheel a little bit, and way down, kilometers down, you might see a direction change slowly start to happen. So I think that's happening.
I happen to feel that even though it's being said in the morning, it's the administrators that are doing it, whoever's, leading O Canada, that kind of thing. And it's almost like I've almost wanted to do it at the beginning of my class, just to acknowledge as well, so that it's coming from the teacher, not just from the administrators. So I'd like to see how that would be taken by the students when you're acknowledging them that way.
Yeah, and like the week of the reconciliation day, we had students make a statement each morning, but that was just for that week, right? And now it's like, oh, we're done. We're gonna finish. Exactly. But I think just talking with you guys right now, I think I really like the idea of me on, like Melissa's doing on Mondays. But one of the things with me teaching this Facing History course is they talk about personalizing it. So Jason, you had said that like it changes up, right? You don't want to just read that rote thing. And so, for example, last week I actually learned the proper names, because we use the term like Stony and Blackfoot and Sarcee, that sort of a thing. And those actually aren't the correct names. So I actually learned the correct names for my region. And I'm thinking, yeah, like maybe every Monday I could talk about an Indigenous hero. So for example, one of the main roads through Calgary is called Deerfoot. And there's a little tiny statue in front of a mall of him, but he was an athlete. So I could, start my Monday classes by going, hey, let me tell you guys about who Deerfoot is, because it's actually, it's interesting that in Calgary, the main arteries are actually named after Indigenous people. There's Métis Trail, there's Sarcee Trail, there's Deerfoot Trail, and those are the main arteries to get through town. But do the kids even know what Sarcee is and who the Sarcee are? So I think that that's a really great way, like you were saying, to have them make that connection without having them slap their hands, because that's what I tell my students all the time. Like I had one kid on his final exam written portion, he just wrote, all I learned is white people are bad. I was like, then you missed the point, right? That I don't want you to feel guilty. And I say that all the time. I say, white men in this class, we're not against you. You're okay. It's just, we want to highlight other people's perspectives, and you feeling guilty, that does us no good. That there's no purpose in trying to make you feel guilty. So yeah, I think that's great idea to kind of just reinforce those straightforward ideas. Yeah.
We have a series of pre-recorded land acknowledgements, so it just kind of cycles through it. And but we're an English language learners magnet, our school, and so one of the things that they did was they made a few that are multilingual. So there are probably about 5 or 6 different languages that are spoken
That's
during
great.
that, and they're all by students. So
yeah,
so it's neat that way. That there's some cool, I could share it with you guys. I've got an assignment that it's not mine. I stole it from somebody else, but it's like making your own land acknowledgement assignment. So
perfect. Yeah, if you could share that would be fantastic.
I'm also going to share in the chat. So I'm taking a master's course right now on contemporary thinkers and how they affect curriculum. And our first week was Leanne Simpson. She's out of Manitoba, actually. And she has a poem where she talks about like recognizing land and stuff, and how Indigenous, like her group, I can't remember which group she belongs to off the top of my head, I apologize, but their perspective on land compared to how it's being used by the mayor. And it's specifically about, they want to create a beach and it's taking away his territory and stuff. So I left the clip for you guys in the chat there.
Okay.
I actually played it one Monday, just the poem part. And I got my kids, we do thought books in my class. We don't do worksheets. And so our prompt was, how can, because it was identity in social 20-1, so nationalism and identity. And their prompt was, how can we reimagine the Canadian identity from a settler non-settler relationship perspective. And one kid created a Canada coat of arms after listening to this, and he's a huge science nerd, and so he made the Canada coat of arms like an atom. And in the center where the nucleus would be, he had like all of this Indigenous ways of knowing. He like Googled stuff from like Métis to Blackfoot to Dakota Sioux, and put that in the center. And the electrons going around were some more settler and colonized perspectives. And he's just like, I put them as electrons because they're a little bit more negative, but you still need it to make it to what Canada is today for it to be stable. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. And so he wrote an entire thing based off of how like we need the Indigenous perspective as our core nucleus, but we all have to learn how to live together.
I love that. That is so awesome.
I have some really nerdy kids this year. I love it.
Don't you though, right? That's fantastic. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So is there anything else that maybe you guys are doing that's really fantastic in your class that you would love to share with each other, of just strategies that could be kind of general? Or I don't know, as teachers, you're like, no, I don't do anything that great.
The only real thing I'm doing this year is my thought books. I'm kind of starting it this year. And the kids are really latching onto it. So I just assign one question a week and I put it on a Google slide, and the kids have to respond to it in any way they want. So some kids said that their weakness last year was their writing. So they want to do more paragraph responses and get practice writing. So they'll find a quote or a source and respond to it that's relating to our topic. So this week, for example, was how is revolutions a process and not just an event? And so one person looked at the Black Lives Matter movement specifically. They attached the video of George Floyd, and they talked about, and then they linked a bunch of news articles back from the 1960s about what events led to George Floyd, versus just focusing on just that one experience. Another person there, again, it was the same nerdy science kid. He created a mock lab report on what you need to create a revolution. And so his materials were like, you need cultural preparedness, and you need to have it where you have like a set future, so a vision for the future and stuff like that. And so he looked at how he can see revolutions and processes right now and compared it to the French Revolution. Other kids, they created infographics. Some created their own PowerPoint presentation on like how they would teach the French Revolution as a process. And so I got all these different things with just that one prompt, because I told them it is up to you. You have to think about your thinking to get full marks.
Right.
And so
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and like their writing has increased substantially. Their application skills, being able to, which is most of social studies, is actually being able to take what you've learned and actually apply it to a source. They've been hitting those out of the ballpark because they're constantly have to do that in class.
Right. How much time do you give them in class to work on it?
I give them, because my expectation is you shouldn't be spending more than like 45 minutes to an hour a week on social studies homework outside of like just studying for tests. So I give them the last 15 minutes of every class.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if I, like yesterday when I had a sub, I gave them the full class to work on their thought books this week. And one of the expectation is, so they're due on Sunday nights because they're on Google Classroom, and Monday they have to, in groups, share their thought books with their peers for 15 minutes. So then they have to get into their small groups being like, oh, this is why I did this. And this is like my thought process. And then they have to self-evaluate at the end. What did you think? Were you being thoughtful this week? Could you have improved? And I allow them to go back to old thought books if something triggered that we learned this week. And they're like, oh, I can add that to my first thought book. And so I'll remark it if they do that, because I want them to think about their thinking constantly. And the kids are really loving it because it's on a Google slide presentation. They get to see their peers as well. Yeah. And they're like, if they're stuck on a topic or they don't know how to answer it, they can check their friends first before they even ask me. So then they're from each other, and it's wonderful. I love it.
Do you happen to have that resource like in a document or something? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I have a PowerPoint presentation. If you guys want to like maybe type your emails if you want it in like the chat there, and I can just copy paste and email it to you. I have a self-reflection thing. I have the presentation that I show them, and I also have some exemplars as well, like because I do it in university for my master's course I'm doing, and it's honestly amazing. So
yeah, because at first I was like, how are you really do have a class of nerds, how are you getting that creativity out of them? But I think that component of them sharing it with their peers, they're not sharing it with you, they're sharing it with their peers. Yes. And then they can build on that creativity, and yet, like you said, the science nerdy kid can express their ways of thinking. I think it's absolutely phenomenal.
Well,
so
and that's the best part, especially if they tell me, hey, I really suck at this thing, so I'm working on this. So if you think mine isn't that good, I'm working on it for this reason. And the thought, like their self-reflection has a rationale piece. If they went and did a whole bunch of extra research, that's where they get to tell me, I struggled with this, and this is how I overcame that struggle.
I love it. Okay, add me in that email list. I know you already have my email, so I'm not going to
I will
put it in the chat. Yeah, we have just a couple more minutes. Does anybody else want to share any sort of great ideas or things that you're like, wow, this is great, it worked really well? And I know right now I'm
It's
like,
tough. This pandemic education, you know, it's kind of tough. It's just more like
yeah,
surviving and putting one foot in front of the other right now.
right. Exactly. I know, like I'm piloting a social justice class that's really intense, really, really intense. And we haven't had to go home yet. Fingers crossed we won't have to. But if we do, I'm like, I can't teach probably half of what we teach in this class because it's too intense, right? Like I can't talk about, you know, the abuse of women or, you know, LGBTQ plus or Indigenous people or Black people, and then just leave the kid to go into the kitchen and get a snack, right? I want to make sure that they're okay. So it's tough. Yeah, absolutely. So
much of it is like that too. I mean, they refine their thinking through, you know, bouncing things off each other. And I have a grade 12 philosophy course, so it's another one of these courses that, and I'm actually slated to teach it as an e-learning course for the first time next semester. So we'll see how that works. Yeah, I struggle with that, but when the assignment came in, I thought, well, okay, we'll give it a try.
Right, because philosophy is very organic, like you said. I mean, you can read a textbook, but that's nothing like the great conversations you can have. And even right now, I mean, on Zoom, we're having a great conversation, but it's not the same as us if we were all sitting at a table having lunch together, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's the joys of this, you know. And I live in a province where we like to pretend it doesn't exist, and so yeah.
You guys, I'm sorry, it's 4:30. I have a son who plays hockey and I gotta take him. Oh.
Well, and I was just gonna say, I'm gonna let you guys go because we're just gonna do some wrap-up comments here in about 10 minutes. But
okay.
Thank you guys for checking in. And if you have any other further questions or anything, feel free to kind of contact the conference administrators and we'll try and help out. But otherwise, I hope you guys had a great conference and I hope we see you guys tomorrow. We've actually gotten some really, really great presenters from the Critical Thinking Consortium, and they will give you a ton of great teaching strategies tomorrow morning. So have a great night, guys. Thank you so much.
And I'm sending that stuff right now.
Thank you both. I appreciate that.
Bye.